It is 10:30 a.m., February 14th, 1929, a freezing, bitter cold morning on the north side of Chicago. Inside a dark, unheated garage at 2122 North Clark Street, 7 men wait, stopping their feet to stay warm. They are waiting for a shipment of stolen, high-grade whiskey. Suddenly, the garage doors crash open. Light floods the room, silhouetting 5 figures. 2 are in civilian clothes. 3 are in the dark blue brass-buttoned uniforms of the Chicago police. For the men inside, this is a problem, but not a death sentence. It's a raid, a shakedown. Annoying, but routine in the world of illegal bootlegging. One of the officers barks an order. "Put your hands up! Get over against the wall, now!" The 7 men comply. They shuffle over to the cold, whitewashed brick wall, turning their backs to the officers. They know the drill. They wait to be searched, to be processed. One of them, a mechanic named John May, has his dog, a German shepherd named Highball, tied to a truck, barking wildly at the intrusion. The men face the wall. They hear the metallic, terrifying click-clack of weapons being readied. These are not pistols. This is not a raid. This is an execution. For the next 15 seconds, the garage explodes in a deafening roar. 2 Thompson submachine guns, Tommy guns, and a shotgun unload a storm of lead into the 7 men. The bullets rip through their heavy winter coats, through flesh and bone, shattering the brick behind them. Over 70 rounds are fired. When the smoke clears, the officers lower their weapons. The 7 men have collapsed into a grotesque, bloody heap at the base of the wall. One of the officers walks over to the pile and fires a final shotgun blast into the face of a man who was still moving. The 5 killers then walk out calmly. To any witnesses on the street, it looks perfectly normal. 2 men in street clothes, their hands raised, being escorted by 3 police officers. It looks like a successful, legitimate arrest. But inside the garage, the walls are painted red. 7 men are dead. The city of Chicago is about to wake up to a new kind of horror. This wasn't a gang fight. This was a massacre. And it would change America forever. Hello and welcome to TSF History, the channel where we dig up the most shocking and fascinating stories from the past. If you're new here, we're glad you found us. Make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you never miss an episode. Today we are traveling back to the height of Prohibition, to a city ruled by gangsters, bullets, and booze. This is the story of the event so brutal it sickened the entire nation and marked the beginning of the end for America's most infamous gangster. This is the story of the St. Valentine's Day Massacre. To understand why 7 men were lined up against a wall and executed in cold blood, you have to understand the city they lived in, Chicago in the 1920s. The 18th Amendment, Prohibition, had made alcohol illegal. But it didn't make people stop drinking. It just made the men who supplied the alcohol incredibly rich and powerful. The city was carved up like a battlefield, controlled by 2 dominant warring empires. In the South, there was the Italian-American outfit, led by the most famous gangster in history, Alphonse Scarface Capone. Capone was more than a criminal. He was a celebrity. He controlled the politicians, the police, and a multi-million-dollar operation of breweries, distilleries, and speakeasies. He was brutal, yes, but he was also charming, and the press loved him. In the North, there was the North Side Gang, a crew of predominantly Irish and Polish-American gangsters. After a series of bloody leadership changes, the gang was now run by a man named George Bugs Moran. Moran hated Capone, and Capone hated him. Their feud wasn't just business, it was personal, and it was bloody.
They had been trading assassinations for years. Moran's man had tried to kill Capone's top enforcer. Capone's men had gunned down Moran's previous boss, Jaime Weiss, in broad daylight. Moran himself had a habit of hijacking Capone's precious whiskey shipments. By the winter of 1928, Al Capone had decided once and for all that Bugs Moran had to be eliminated. Not just him, but his entire senior leadership. Capone wanted the North Side Gang decapitated. The plan was hatched by Capone and his chief lieutenant, Jack Machine Gun McGurn. It was brilliant in its simplicity and its cruelty. First, they needed bait. They used a low-level hoodlum to contact Moran, pretending to be a hijacker who had a whole truckload of premium Canadian whiskey at a ridiculously low price. In the cold of February, good whiskey was scarce. Moran took the bait. He agreed to the deal, setting the time and place for the delivery, 10:30 a.m. on February 14th, at his primary headquarters and liquor warehouse, the Garage at 2122 North Clark Street. Second, Capone needed an alibi, an iron-clad one. Days before the hit, Al Capone traveled to his luxurious estate in Palm Island, Florida. He made sure he was seen. He even arranged to be sick and scheduled a meeting with the local district attorney at his home at the exact time the massacre was planned, hundreds of miles away. He was untouchable. Third, they needed the element of surprise. This is where the plan became truly sinister. McGurn's team wouldn't just be gunmen, they would be impersonators. They acquired stolen police uniforms, badges, and even a squad car that looked identical to the ones used by the Chicago PD. The trap was set. The players were in place. All they needed was the target. On the morning of February 14th, 1929, the Garage on North Clark Street was busy. The lookouts for Capone's team, posted in an apartment across the street, watched as Moran's crew began to arrive. First, there was Albert Kachelik, also known as James Clark, Moran's second in command. Then came Adam Hare and Albert Weinshank, two of the gang's business managers. Along with them were two enforcers, Frank and Peter Gussenberg, two of the toughest and most feared men in the city. But these five weren't the only ones there. A sixth man, Dr. Reinhard Schwimmer, was also present. Schwimmer wasn't a gangster at all. He was an optometrist who loved hanging around the North Siders, fascinated by their dangerous lifestyle. He was, for lack of a better term, a gangster groovy. And the seventh and final man was John May. May was a mechanic who worked at the Garage, trying to fix one of the gang's trucks. He was just a civilian, in the wrong place at the wrong time. The Capone lookouts watched the Garage. They saw a man arrive that matched the description of Bugs Moran. Same height, same build, same overcoat and fedora. It was Albert Weinshank. The lookouts mistook him for the boss. They gave the signal. Moran is here. The police car pulled up. The five killers got out and entered the Garage. And now for the twist of fate that saved Bugs Moran's life. The real Bugs Moran was in fact approaching the Garage at that very moment, walking down the street. He was running late. As he got close, he saw the police car parked outside. He instantly thought it was a raid. Annoyed, he ducked into a coffee shop to wait for the cops to leave. He had no idea what was happening inside. He had no idea he was the reason for it. Inside, the seven men were facing the wall. The two Tommy guns opened up, spraying a horizontal line of .45 caliber bullets across their backs. The men screamed and fell. The shotgun finished the job. The killers were professional. They took their time, ensuring everyone was dead. Frank Gussenberg, despite having 14 bullets in him, would cling to life for 3 more hours, but the others died instantly.
The killers then performed their final act, The two men in civilian clothes put their hands in the air, and the three officers marched them out of the garage at gunpoint. To any neighbors peering out their windows, it looked like the police had raided the garage and were marching two prisoners to their car. The squad car pulled away, disappearing into the city. It wasn't until John May's terrified dog, Highball, who had been howling and barking nonstop, drew the attention of a neighbor that the alarm was truly raised. The neighbor entered the garage and saw the carnage. When the real Chicago police arrived, they were speechless. They had never seen anything like it. The scene was so bloody, so absolute, it looked more like a battlefield than a crime scene. They found Frank Gussenberg, somehow still alive. They rushed him to the hospital. Detectives leaned in close, begging him to identify his killers. "Who shot you, Frank?" Gussenberg, loyal to the gangster code of omerta, or silence, even in death, refused. His last words were, "Nobody shot me. I ain't no copper." He died 3 hours later. The news hit the city like a bomb. The initial reports all said the same thing: police execute 7 in garage. The public was horrified, believing their own police force had committed mass murder. When the truth came out, that it was gangsters impersonating police, the horror didn't fade, it deepened. This was a new low. Gangsters had always killed each other, but using the uniform, the very symbol of law and order, to commit mass murder, that was an attack on society itself. When reporters found Bugs Moran later that day, he was visibly shaken. He knew he was the target. He famously told the press, "Only Capone kills like that." From his alibi in Florida, Capone put on a show of mock surprise. He told reporters, "I'm in Florida. The only man who kills like that is Bugs Moran." But no one was fooled. The world knew who was responsible. The St. Valentine's Day Massacre was, ironically, the single worst strategic mistake Al Capone ever made. He had intended to wipe out his competition. Instead, he made himself the most hated man in America. The public, which had once been charmed by his Robin Hood persona, was now completely repulsed. They saw him for what he was, a vicious murderer. President Herbert Hoover, newly inaugurated, was disgusted. He reportedly told his Treasury Secretary, "I want that man in jail." The problem was, Capone was too smart. There was no evidence. He never touched the guns. He wasn't in the state. The massacre itself would technically remain an unsolved crime. No one was ever convicted for the murders. But the federal government, now with the full support of an outraged public, unleashed everything it had on Capone. If they couldn't get him for murder, they would get him for something. A young, ambitious agent from the Treasury Department named Eliot Ness was put in charge of a small, hand-picked team. They became known as the Untouchables because they couldn't be bribed. They worked to destroy Capone's bootlegging operation. Simultaneously, a different federal team was working on an even more powerful weapon: Capone's finances. They began a quiet, meticulous investigation into his income. While Capone had dodged hundreds of murder charges, he had made one fatal error. He hadn't paid his taxes. In 1931, the federal government finally indicted Al Capone on 22 counts of federal income tax evasion. He was found guilty and sentenced to 11 years in federal prison. He would be sent to Alcatraz, where his power, his influence, and his health evaporated. He was released after 8 years, his mind and body ravaged by syphilis. He died, a broken and powerless man, in 1947. He never returned to Chicago. The St. Valentine's Day Massacre was the high-water mark of the gangster era. It was the moment the public's romance with the bootlegger died, replaced by a demand for law and order. It exposed the deep-seated corruption that had allowed men like Capone to flourish and led to a wave of reform. The 7 men who died that day were gangsters, yes, but their deaths, so public and so brutal,
became the catalyst that finally brought down public enemy number one, not with a bang, but with a tax form. The legacy of that bloody morning on North Clark Street is a reminder that in the end, even the most powerful empires built on violence will eventually crumble under their own weight. What do you think is the most shocking part of this story? Was it the police disguises or Capone's perfect alibi? Let us know your thoughts in the comments section below. If you found this story as fascinating as we did, do us a favor and hit that like button. It really helps the channel. And of course, if you haven't already, make sure to subscribe to TSF History and ring that bell for more unbelievable stories from our past. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.